In many of the stories in Chumash, we find that there's a tension that builds at the beginning of a story. There's a climax that's awesome, that's cool, that's a little bit unnatural. And it usually teeters into this kind of slow developing plateau of the next part of the story, and the Jewish people moved on, and the next segment happens. And in Parshat Korach, we find it a little bit different, because we do have that Korach versus Moshe tension, and we have the climax, the battle of Korach, Datan Aviram, and the 250 men, where Korach, Datan, and Aviram are swallowed by the earth, and the fire comes down and smites the 250 men. But in the aftermath, we have a weird resolution. We find that Elazar ben Aharon HaKohen is commanded to go and collect the firepans that were used by these 250 men and smelt them onto the Mizbeach to use as a sign, as a remembrance to the rest of the Jewish people that they should not be bringing the Ketoret. The only ones allowed to bring the Ketoret are the Bnei Aharon, and anyone who is not Mizera Aharon, anyone who is not in the lineage a descendant of Aharon HaKohen, should not be bringing the Ketoret. And of course the episode is strange. Why is it that we care about these machtot, and why do they need to be placed on the Mizbeach, and how does that help us remember that you should not bring the Ketoret unless you are a Ben Aharon? But what I'm fascinated by is the fact that the Torah, and really Hashem, goes out of his way to select Elazar, Ben Aharon HaKohen, to perform the avodah of collecting the machtot. Because up until this point, I believe Elazar has only been mentioned twice. He was mentioned first in Parashat Tetzaveh along with the other Bnei Aharon, and he's mentioned in the aftermath of Nadav and Avihu in Parashat Shmini, where he essentially is told to continue serving in the Mishkan despite the fact that he is an Avelut over the loss of his brothers. And throughout Sefer Vayikra and the beginning of Bamidbar, the role of the Kohen and the role of doing things for a spiritual purpose is really delegated only to Moshe and Aharon. So the fact that Elazar is mentioned here is quite striking, which is why the commentaries try and pick up on this, and the Parshanim have some explanations about why Elazar is chosen. The Netziv, for example, says that Elazar's avoda was the Mizbeach, and therefore to collect the firepans for the sake of the Mizbeach, it falls upon Elazar to go and collect the machtot. The Orach Chaim HaKadosh explains differently. He says that Aharon was not allowed to go and collect the machtot eish, because if he does, it sort of looks like he's gloating. It looks like he's boasting about the fact that he was the victor in this battle. It looks like, since he was one of the people involved, he is going and collecting the spoils of war, which of course for Milchamto Shel Torah and a Machloket L'Shem Shemayim is unbecoming of anyone, especially the Kohen Gadol. I believe, however, that there might be a different reason that Elazar was chosen here to collect the machtot, and that is the emotional state of Elazar at this point. Elazar is probably terrified of doing certain avodot in the Mishkan, specifically when it comes to the Ketoret, because we've seen it now twice where people have literally been burned for bringing the Ketoret. Here, in Parshat Korach, we have the 250 men, and of course the brothers of Elazar in Parshat Shmini that we mentioned before, Nadav and Avihu, were burned for bringing the Ketoret. And the Abarbanel points out the wonderful parallel of language in the Torah. In Bamidbar Perek Yud Zayin, in this story, Pasuk Bet, we see that the Torah explains that Elazar should go v'yaremet hamachtot mi bein hasreifa, he should go and raise or collect the machtot from between the fire, from between the burning, ve'et ha'ish zirei hala, which the Abarbanel says, of course, reminds us of the Eish Zara of Parshat Shmini, the Eish Zara that came and killed Nadav and Avihu. And you can imagine that at this point, Elazar is terrified. Elazar wants nothing to do with the Ketoret ever again. And in order to assure that he will be ready to be the next Kohen Gadol, in order to assure that when Moshe and Aharon are told in next week's Parsha that they will not be entering the land, Elazar is told now to deal with the Ketoret. He must go and put aside his fear, almost in a test-like or mission-like fashion, where he should go and collect the machtot. Don't be scared of the fact that the machtot have burned now 252 people, because you are Mizera Aharon and you are the upcoming Kohen Gadol, which I think teaches us of the story of Sefer Bamidbar, not just one of the travels in the desert, but the transition of those who left Egypt in Sefer Shemot and received the Torah, and the generation of Moshe and Aharon, and the next generation of Yehoshua, of Elazar, of the Jewish people that will go into the land, which is why last week we already learned of Yehoshua and Kalev's greatness, and the fact that we're going to have 40 years in the desert instead of 1 year in the desert to get to Israel. And in next week's Parsha, as I mentioned, we're going to learn of the fact that Moshe and Aaron will not make it into the land, which means that the stories that happen and the travels in Sefer Bamidbar are the story of the transition from that Shemot generation to the Yehoshua, the Bamidbar, the generation that will enter the land. And if Elazar HaKohen is too scared to bring the Ketoret, then we lack the leadership necessary to enter the land. And therefore Hashem tells Moshe it must be Elazar and not Aharon who goes and collects the firepan, because Elazar will become that Kohen who leads the people into the land of Israel and will allow for the priestly leadership once we enter the land. Shabbat Shalom.